Hey everybody, welcome back to another week of Patriot to the Core podcast. I appreciate you joining me again this week. I am coming off of an awesome weekend. I attended Kyle Defoor's 2-day scoped rifle class. And man, it was a good time, really good for me. I learned a ton. We didn't just cover guns and shooting, short 100 to about 465 yards is the longest we went. I mean, it was really, we studied the optics and the reticles, and also did some combatives and some blade work and blade defense. We did some binocular work, got some lessons on binoculars, and then also looking for, finding things, I guess, out in nature. And we did some up close, about 7 yards shooting. So it was really awesome. I'm trying to think of what else we did, but we went over medical. Anyway, I just encourage you to check out Kyle and his company, D4 Performance. I actually had Kyle as a guest on episode number 26 back in April. So if you go back and listen, you can kind of get a feel for his background, what he did in the military and in the Navy. He's he's not really outspoken when it comes to his background. He doesn't broadcast everything that he did in the military, but he's very well respected, and also he's definitely got the credentials to back up what he's doing. So awesome class. They're hard to get in, so I'll put a link to his website in the show notes. Also, before we get in with our Major General Boles, I would say that if you have an iPhone, if you've updated your iOS to the latest version, I don't know what it is, 11, or I don't know what it is, but they have really made it easy to rate podcast now. I'm so glad they did this, because I could never really explain to anyone how to rate one. But now I still can't explain to you, but it's so easy. If you find the podcast on there, you can basically scroll down and you can go ahead and give it the starred rating, and you can write a review pretty easy. So that's just a plug for if you would go in and rate the podcast, please. Now I will just introduce Major General Vinny Boles. He and I sat down and talked in person recently at Southeastern Skin Cancer and Dermatology, which is a friend of ours' business, Bo Rivera, and I was glad we were able to meet in person up in Huntsville, and had a great time with him. He's basically in the professional speaking circuit now, but he just served 9 years as a general in the Army. He was also an Army officer with 33 years of experience, so he's just a dynamic guy. And so we talk not much about his military career. We do talk about some mistakes he made as a leader, especially a young officer. But then we talk a lot about leadership, leading in a crisis, and morale, and delivering bad news, and keeping your best, getting better, that thing. Kind of staying, if you already are, maybe if things are going well, then how do you stay? How do you keep it at a high level and keep improving? So anyway, I'll bring in Vinny now.
So Vinny, how is business?
Business is really well. You've got to get used to white space on the calendar sometimes. Like I had an incident where it was April, and I looked out for the rest of the year, and I had one event. And then you get kind of worried about that, but you keep pushing and doing the best you can, and all of a sudden, 3 weeks later, I've got 7 events on the calendar, and it moves from there. So business is going very, very well. I'm as busy as I want to be, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, so before we get into your work, I want to go back a little bit, because I don't know anything about your background other than you're a Major General in the Army, which is a 2-star general. I'm curious, first of all, is it the same across Air Force, Navy? Is a 2-star general, a Navy general, a Major General, and then really, what was your military career like? Maybe some deployments, that kind of thing.
Sure. I came in the Army in 1976. Army was going through a major transformation, coming from 1.5 million folks in the Vietnam era down to 785,000. That was when I came in the Army. Then after that, the next big surge was after I deployed to Desert Shield, Desert Storm with the 2nd Armored Division. And then after we came out of that, the Army went from 785,000 with the implosion of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall, went down to 480,000. So I saw those were the major reductions I saw in the force as I was going on. Went to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and fought there. Came back, and then my first assignment, my first command as a general officer, I was sent out to Rock Island, Illinois, to command something called the Field Support Command. And it had a lot of things to do with, the biggest thing it had to do was we were responsible for all the war reserves around the world that were stockpiled all around the world. And I took that job 6 weeks before 9/11. And when I got to the job, it was all budgets are tight, terrible to be you, good luck, fair share of the shortages, et cetera, constraints, everything else. Then 9/11 happened, and my reality quickly changed to how much money do you need and how fast can we get these war stocks up to where we got to go and everything else. And that was probably the biggest shuffle and transformation I saw. I was very blessed. I was a general officer for 9 years. And 5 of those 9 years, I was a commanding general in 4 different operations in 4 different places. And I was very, very blessed. Many of my friends and as general officers, maybe they got one command with troops, in their entire general officer career. And I got 5 straight years of it. So I was pretty fortunate, pretty blessed.
What was the morale like during Desert Storm, Desert Shield?
Morale was 2 things. Morale was high. But soldiers and leaders especially were apprehensive. We were apprehensive because we were facing a guy who had used chemical weapons in the past. And that really kept us awake at night. Would he unleash chemical weapons, and how would he do that? Therefore, that was why we had the overwhelming force of 500,000 soldiers, and we're designed to move very, very quickly because we wanted to do that because that was our apprehension, and we quickly overwhelmed them and went from there. But that, I think, was and it was the first time we had been in combat really since Vietnam. We had some minor skirmishes in Grenada and Panama, but it was the first major conflict we had had. And when you think of the shift, we took all these units out of Germany that were ready to fight the Soviet onslaught. And all of a sudden we said, okay, now you're not going to fight the Soviets anymore. You're going to come out of Germany and you're going to go down to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and Iraq, and you're going to fight in there. That was a big mental shift for a lot of folks. But the biggest apprehension, I think, going in was chemical weapons, and we were able to handle that if it came at us. We thought we could. Thankfully, we didn't have to find out.
Did you have any direct dealings with Schwarzkopf?
No, I did not, other than I knew him. I knew of him, but no, I had no direct dealings with him.
Yeah, because I was a early teenager then, and I remember just the pride I had, knowing that I felt so confident in our military over there, and then I got this great book on the war and on Schwarzkopf, and I just thought he was just the greatest, leader in the world, and so yeah, it seemed like high morale times.
It was the first time we had fought, and many of those officers that were senior leaders and generals in our Army during Desert Shield, Desert Storm had been lieutenants and captains in the Vietnam experience and had suffered through that and the trauma that brought to the nation and the angst it brought to the nation. So it was, for many of them, in my opinion, it was a vindication of, we're okay as an Army. We've gone back out and proven it, and we're okay and doing very, very well. So yeah, it was a vindication for both the nation and the services as well.
So what about your life now? You're traveling around the country, or maybe the world. You're speaking. I'll have links in the show notes to your website, and there's some great videos of you, clips of different businesses you're speaking to on different topics. Mainly, it seems like it's on leadership in a crisis. I mean, what are you doing now, and how'd you get into it?
If you had told me 10 years ago that I was going to be out of the Army, I was going to be living in Alabama, and I was going to be speaking to corporate and association audiences and being an executive coach around the world, I would have said you're 0 for 3. That's not happening. But each of those has happened. Started in 2007. I was at the University of Virginia speaking to a graduation commissioning class of about 100 Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps cadets that were about ready to become officers. Finished speaking, and a Navy dad came up to me and asked if I'd ever thought about being a public speaker. I said, no, I hadn't. He said, well, you should think about that, because I pay guys to do that, and they were not half as good as you. And I said, people get paid to do this? He said, yeah, they do. I said, oh, okay. And then one thing led to another, and I ran into a guy who knew another guy who knew another guy, and a video of me speaking to an audience on active duty got to the Washington Speakers Bureau in Alexandria, Virginia, which is the gold standard among speakers bureaus. And they took a look at it, called me up. I went over, had an interview with them, met their sales staff. They thought I could fit a niche for them. And the next thing I know, literally 2 weeks before I finish my terminal leave and sign out of the Army, I'm speaking to an audience in Laguna Beach, California about leading in a crisis. And that's what I've been doing in the 8 years since. But it was not a path I had expected to be on.
fulfilling path, sounds like.
You meet wonderful people. You meet a wide swath of people. I have spoken to the Secret Service. I have spoken to Fidelity and USAA Financial Services. I've spoken to the Volunteers of America. I mean, I've spoken to the landscape architects of America. So, I mean, there's a wide swath, and it just shows that regardless of the field that you're in, leadership is a needed capability that you've got to have, and a lot of organizations are interested in finding out about that, and associations.
What are these companies specifically wanting you to speak on, or do they just say leadership and you take it from there?
No, usually they will have either the two major topics that I speak on are supply chain optimization, which is what my portfolio was in the Army, getting the right thing to the right place in enough time that the person who needs it can do something with it. Or I would also speak on leadership because of the extensive time I spent commanding and leading soldiers. So those are the two big portfolios. About 3 to 6 weeks before an event, I will sit down telephonically with the people that have hired me, and we'll go over, tell me about the audience, tell me the demographics, tell me the psychographics of the audience. What's keeping them awake at night? What are their big challenges? And I will then build a presentation based off of that and what they need. And that's what I'll do. And it varies on audiences. I spoke to an audience now just this past weekend in Tucson, Arizona, and it was a logistics and supply chain forum, and they wanted to talk about leading supply chain organizations and logistics organizations and how you get that done. This weekend I'll be out in Pebble Beach, California, and I'll be speaking to another group of 35 to 40 CEOs that work with this company that's hired me. And that's going to be completely different. These are going to be very high-level executives that are leading organizations, and that'll be more a strategic orientation as opposed to a tactical orientation of how you do that. So you have to target your audience and see what they need and go from there. And I've been blessed with enough experiences and ranges of experiences in leadership and supply chains that I can do that.
I wasn't planning to ask this, but do you ever get into like proper sleep and proper diet or exercise to help them to be better leaders? Do you talk about that side at all?
I do talk about work-life balance, and I do talk to them about the 4 critical things I found over time leaders have to do every day. And if you're a leader, there's 4 critical things I found that if I don't do these 4 things, I suffer. The first is you got to take time to think. You have to take some time to think. You can get so busy in the cycle and stir of things, you don't take time to think about, what am I supposed to be doing? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Is it going the way I want it to go? Second, you've got to take time to read. And you've got to read and sit back enough to read that causes you to think and causes you to think about things you haven't thought about. Then you've also got to take time to eat and hydrate yourself. I know when I get in a cycle of leadership, especially when I would deploy, reading and hydration and things like that and thinking and taking care of myself was an afterthought. You'll burn yourself out and you'll drive yourself too hard. And finally, the last thing you have to do is you have to rest. You have to get some sleep. I would see leaders that made this Iron Man thing about, okay, well, I'll stay awake the next 3 or 4 days. Well, it was very interesting. The decisions they made on day 1 were a whole lot different than the decisions they'd make on day 3 or 4. Mm-hmm. So I learned that you have to pace yourself, have to take care of yourself, and you have to build a team that can do those things. But yeah, I have folks talk to me about that. Another thing that's become a bigger cycle is a work-life balance. That's the bigger stressor. How do I balance the requirements that are going on in my work at the same time all the requirements are going on in my life? And the millennial generation that's coming up now and assuming an ever-expanding leadership role, they are not buying into, I'm going to work myself into the ground and get a check at the end of the day and it's all going to be okay. They want to have that balance between being able to take care of their family, between taking care of their needs and their requirements, what they think they need and want to do, and at the same time doing the work requirements that they have to do. So it's interesting. When I first started in the speaking business, a go-to hook that a lot of speakers would use, I didn't, but a go-to hook a lot of speakers would use is they come out and they tell a millennial joke. And everybody kind of laugh and ruck yuck and roar and everything else. Interesting, 8-9 years later, people who tell that joke don't get as much laughter, and the reason is there are more millennials in the workforce now than there are baby boomers.
Yeah.
When I first started, I would get questions from baby boomers saying, how do I manage and lead these millennials? Interesting. The questions I'm getting now are from millennials going, how do I lead these baby boomers on my team to get stuff done who don't seem to get it and can't think outside the box? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of interesting to watch how the dynamics change. But I do get a lot of questions about work-life balance, about taking care of yourself, and about handling yourself through the demands of leadership.
Yeah, I heard somebody say recently, they talked about it's like the opposite mentorship of having an older person in a company be mentored by a millennial on maybe it's technology or I don't know what it is, but I thought, well, that's a pretty good idea too, because if I just look at it from the simple fact of technology and apps and things like that, is I constantly have to get updated by someone who is. I like going to somebody fresh out of college, say, can you help me with Excel? With this, I thought I was good with Excel, but I'm not. I mean, there's a lot I don't understand. So that is a topic that is being addressed a lot, and it's interesting you say how a lot of your questions are now coming from millennials. Yeah, I mean they're in their 30s now,
who are in leadership roles.
Yeah,
and they want to know how to handle this, because they know how to work with their peers, but know how to lead a bunch of seniors. And one of the reasons they come to guys like us in the military is, I was a second lieutenant. I was 22 years old, and I had a platoon sergeant who was 35 years old and had been in Vietnam twice already, and I was his boss. You got to figure that out real fast, that you can't come walking in, shouting orders, throwing people around and saying, here's what we're going to do. You got to build a coalition and coalesce folks and lead folks.
How did you approach that situation, and what mistakes did you make, possibly?
The biggest mistake I made at that time, I still remember it. I tried to be one of the guys. I wanted to show I wasn't bigger than them. I wanted to be one of the guys. And I fell into a bit more profanity than I should have. And I'd been doing it for a couple of weeks, and my platoon sergeant came to me, God love him, Charles Fred. And he walked up, he said, sir, me and the other sergeants were talking. We think it's real cool that we got a lieutenant who's like all over it. And I was kind of feeling cocky, saying, yeah, I got this stuff. And he looked and said, yeah, we think it's real cool. We got a lieutenant who knows all the same swear words we do. And I can telling that story to you right now, I can feel the cold pit in my stomach when he said that. And I thought, oh my God, I've screwed this up. And then to show what a great leader he was, he reached out and tapped me on the shoulder and said, but we know you're going to be okay, sir. You're going to snap out of that now, aren't you? I said, yeah. And to this day, if I catch a leader falling into profanity or falling into some of those things, what I've learned over time is if you lose control of yourself by falling into profanity or rages or things like that, you may think you're motivating your folks. What you're really doing is you're showing them you're out of control, and what you're making them question is, do I really want this guy to control me if he or she can't control themselves?
Yeah.
So that was probably the biggest lesson I learned coming up. Also, the Army is 242 years old. The Army has survived second lieutenants before. I'm not the first second lieutenant that's come into the Army and said I'm in charge of a sergeant. It's part of our culture, and they understand that. They want me to be in charge. They just don't want me to be a dictator if I don't have to be. So that's the biggest thing I found out with that.
So I want to tell you about a situation that I had years ago for a job I worked at, very short period of time. I didn't really want to take the job, but I'd been laid off, and I said, okay, I'll give it a chance, even though this company did not have a good reputation, in my opinion. And there was a lot of negativity. The morale was low. A lot of work hours every weekend, overtime, and my role was not clearly defined by my leadership. It was like, hey, well, we needed a materials manager, but we had two strong candidates, you and this other lady, so we just hired you both, and we'll let y'all be the materials managers. And it was a really odd situation, and there were some young ladies in the office that I don't know for sure if I managed them or not. Part of this is my fault too, right? Not really finding out, but we had no leadership at all, and therefore I was probably a poor leader. But there was some back talking and shutting the door and talking, making fun of people and laughing. I mean, how do you handle that kind of situation as a leader?
First and foremost, what I found is folks take their cues off their leadership. If you don't like the way things are going, before you go out and start ranting and raving at folks, you got to sit down and ask yourself, what signals am I giving off that lets them think that negative behavior is okay? Because I may be saying one thing and doing another. So what signals am I giving off? I've seen leaders who would stand there in front of a group of soldiers and say, physical training is very important. And soldiers would be looking at them thinking, yeah, and you look like the last time you ever ran was when you heard the donut shop was closing. Mm-hmm. I mean, they just give me a break here. So they want to see you mirror the behavior. If you want an organization that's professional, competent, cool, calm, then you have to be professional, competent, cool, and calm. You have to mirror the behavior that you want. So when I find backtalk going on, negative talk going on, things of that nature, the first thing I try to do is I try to be positive and set the right tone. I understand they take their cues from me. What I also do is if I find backtalk going on, I will, about anybody, I will confront them, but I try to confront them very safely. I just walk over and say, hey, I understand you've been talking about this. Can I clear anything up for you? Is there, any question marks you got about that or any things I can answer for you? Because nature doesn't like a vacuum. So if there's a leadership vacuum at the top level, don't think that someone's not going to try to fill it at a bottom level. And that's where scuttlebutt and rumors and all that other stuff come from. It's because leaders don't step up and fill the vacuum. Your folks will step up and fill the vacuum. So what you have to do is when there's stress going on, question marks going on, things of that nature, you have to more engage and more communicate with folks as opposed to less. And there are leaders under stress who think, well, I better not talk so much. No, get it out there and tell them what you know, answer their questions. I still remember one time in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, I was talking to a bunch of soldiers. Our situation was changing. And they said, you got to brief your kids. So I had an easel with me. And the first thing I did was pull it out of the back of the Humvee, put it up, and said, there are 20 kids out there standing out there. I said, what are your questions? And I wrote every one of their questions down. And I just started at the top. I answered all their questions. And I said, what are the questions you got? And I said, no, we kind of got it. I said, okay. And then something just told me to do this. I shook each one of their hands and thanked them. Years later, I had some of those kids run into me, and they would say, we still remember you taking the time to ask us what our questions were and answering our questions, not coming in and giving us a script and saying, here's what I got to tell you. And they said, the fact that you shook our hands after everything. So it became one of my things. Whenever I'd have a big briefing to soldiers or a big initiative, like before we went on a deployment, I would always stand by the door when it was over, and I would always shake their hands, and I'd always thank them. And that little contact of them looking me in the eye, it almost like sealed a little contract between the two of us. I'm here for you. You're here for me. We'll be here for each other. And I found that was pretty critical.
Yeah, I can believe that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
What about, can we elaborate more on your own leadership in a crisis?
Sure. It's the big challenge of leading in a crisis is the organization's hit. A crisis has hit the organization's hurting, the organization may be reeling, you may be reeling, and exactly at the time that the organization's been beat down, you've been beat down, you have to step up and you have to be at your best. Because that's when you really have to be at your best. Anybody can be a good leader when it's 70 degrees out, the sun's shining, you got 3 email messages in your inbox, and the only crisis you got is your HR person and finance person are running up and down the halls going, I don't know what to do with all these great candidates we got, and I don't know what to do with all this money we have. Things are just wonderful. Leadership's pretty easy then. It's when the heat's high, the pressure's on, and the outcome's uncertain, and stress and a crisis hits the organization that you really have to watch people step up. And that's when you have to be at your best as a leader. That's when you have to be more proactive, more responsive, more predictive about what's going to happen and try to tell your folks everything you can and free them up so they can get stuff done. Because people in a crisis, the organization will have a bias toward action. They'll want to do something to respond to a crisis. And if you sit on your hands and say, well, wait till I figure something out, it's going to be too late.
Are there any specifics that either that you experienced in your career or with companies that you talked to that you could kind of elaborate on with some of these crises?
9/11. 6 weeks before 9/11, as I started to tell you, I went out to Rock Island, Illinois, to the heartland of America, and took over this organization that had all war reserves. And then, on the 11th of September, I'm walking into work, and I detailed at the start of the book. I'm walking into work, and 2 planes have flown into the World Trade Center. And all of a sudden, by the end of the day, we're at war. And in 6 hours, we're shipping bombs to Whiteman Air Force Base to start loading up, to start getting ready for bombing runs that they're preparing to go on, to have to do to respond. So I saw the organization transform itself. And I didn't have a second team. My folks at Rock Island were all planning folks and contingency folks. And then when the contingency actually happened, we had to execute it. I couldn't go out, open up the door, and call central casting and say, okay, give me the operational team now. The same people that were doing the planning had to do the execution. And those civilians, predominantly a civilian organization, went from 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, to 24/7 operations, 365. They are still doing it to this day. And that was probably one of the more amazing events that I went through, to see how people respond. And they really want leadership, and they want you to tell them what you know. They also want you to ask. I would always get in the habit of asking before I launch people off. I'd say, okay, now what am I missing? When you walk out the door and sit down at your desk, what are you going to say I forgot to ask you or forgot to tell you to do? And I always learn something every time. Somebody would always tell me something, and I go, that's a good one, I forgot that.
How would you say the leadership was at that time? From the top, let's talk about the president down to the leadership in the military. What was it like after 9/11?
It was challenging because we had not, despite the intel and everything else, as an organization and as a nation, we were not ready for that. People forget, people will talk about Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor happened in Hawaii, thousands of miles outside the continental United States, in an era when we did not have instantaneous communication, to a place that was not yet a state, and it happened on a military base predominantly. So Pearl Harbor was an event that galvanized the nation, but it galvanized the nation over a couple of days. 9/11 happened, and everybody saw it live on TV when the second plane hit. First plane hit, everybody's tuning in. They watched the second plane in real time start hitting. They watch the Pentagon get hit. They watch the Pentagon get hit, and they see all that happening in real time. That really galvanizes people, and it really strikes at people. President Bush even commented that he should have immediately come back to Washington. Vice President Cheney and Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor, advised maybe you need to stay away till we sort this all out. Looking back on it now, he says, no, I should have come right back, set things up. But we were not initially ready as a nation, prepared as a nation, nor I think was the world prepared for something like that, to hit it real time, to see everything unfold. And that was, I think, the bigger challenge of it. In responding to something like that, you want to make sure you do the right thing. More importantly, you want to make sure you don't do the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, there were people who were saying, just take nukes and hit Afghanistan and blow it back into the Stone Age. Well, that might do some things, but it would not have... It would not have elicited a response. It would have been a good immediate response and would have satisfied some rage and a desire for revenge. But it wouldn't have been a geostrategic military response we should have engaged in.
Have you been surprised or were you surprised at the response of how many people joined the military because of 9/11?
I was gratified by that. By the number of people. I'd heard all this gas about how terrible this generation was and everything else. I get asked on occasion, General Boles, we had the greatest generation in World War II. They were the greatest generation. They did all these great things. What about this generation? And I tell these people that you already have the greatest generation of the 21st century out there now. I hear all this gas about millennials and how terrible they are. Every year, 170,000 young men and women join the United States Army. And they join the United States Army knowing there's a very good chance they're going to go into conflict, go into combat. And they know that. And yet they still join. And I have seen these kids go off into the dirt and the dark and in the face of an enemy that wants to kill them and lead convoys and lead patrols and connect with villages and build schools and improve water systems. And I see them do it day in and day out. And they are great teammates. And ladies and gentlemen, if you want to find the greatest generation of the 21st century, go look at your military right now. They are out there and they are doing their grandfathers very, very proud by how they're acting right now.
You say 170,000. That's just the Army.
That's
right?
just the
That's
Army.
Just the Army.
Yeah, the Army does more than the Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps combined. But the Army is the largest service, and we bring about 170,000 a year in that is active reserve component National Guard.
Wow. How did 9/11 affect you personally? Because you're from up in that area.
Yeah, I was born and raised in New York City. My dad would take me downtown when the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers were going up. So when I was in Rock Island and I looked on TV and I saw them go down, it had a pretty visceral effect in me. I mean, they didn't just hit America, they hit my home. I mean, I lived there. I'd walked those streets down in New York. So that really viscerally affected me. My mother had girlfriends of hers who had sons and daughters in the financial district who passed away and were killed in that. So it was a much more visceral, personal effect for me than for others.
Mm, yeah. All right. Well, moving on. Praise. What public or private praise? When is it appropriate or not? And how good is it?
Yeah, well, first off, if you praise people, it's good because you are saying to them, I recognize what you're doing, and it's making a difference, and thank you. So you never go wrong doing that when you praise publicly. The only challenge when you praise publicly, and I think one of the reasons it happens so infrequently, is leaders are afraid they're going to forget somebody. So I don't get into what I call laundry list praise deals. You know, where you go out with a laundry list of, I need to thank these 6 people who did a great job the last quarter, A, B. Well, you're going to forget somebody. Or you're going to praise somebody who didn't do all the work and forget somebody who did do all the work about it. What I do find is better when you praise in public, I praise around a project. Gang, we just had the XYZ project go off this quarter, and I will tell you, the people involved in that, you are making such a difference. It's making a big difference. That project's a big deal. Now you've coalesced them around the project and what's going on. So I find praising in public is always positive. One of the reasons it happens again so infrequently is people are afraid of forgetting somebody and turning it into a negative for the organization as opposed to a positive. In private, usually, almost always, you bring people in and you discipline in private. Because what I found is in an organization, when you discipline somebody publicly, the organization is looking at their peer getting hit. They have to make a decision about, you know, do they align with their peer or do they align with their superior? And most people will align with their peer. I've seen it as an instructor. You will be teaching, and I've seen some instructors decide to be a smart aleck, and they'll take on somebody in the classroom. You really shouldn't have said something like that. That's pretty stupid. Well, as soon as they say that, I watch the class turn on the instructor. You know, the tribes build up pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. So I find praising in public always works, oriented around a project usually and an accomplishment, and disciplining in private.
Okay. Going back to a crisis, like a small crisis, someone asks you, like, I work for a company that, by the way, I am a supply chain guy, right? I'm in corporate procurement now. I've been a buyer. I've been in inventory control. We have that in common. I forgot to tell you, but the steel industry has margins are very low right now. Sales are no worse than they were last year. It's just the margins are very thin, and we've done some downsizing. Even in the procurement group, they let go of some people. And I remember seeing an email. I was on vacation. I happened to check my phone. I saw the email, and it just kind of, my heart sunk because I knew these people they let go. Of course, the thought is, am I next? Is my job on the line? And how do you, as a leader, when you're even like your group is having to lay people off, how do you lead in those type of situations?
Well, first off, it's interesting you mentioned that about layoffs, and I want to track it to the millennial conversation we've had. I was listening to a radio show a while back, and they were talking to a bunch of young millennials, and they were all talking about their side hustles. That was the story of that was the theme of the show. They were talking to all these kids about their side hustles, about the side jobs they had. In addition to working for the ABC Corporation, they were an Uber driver, or they were a graphic artist, or they were a musician or whatever. And this one young man was talking, and he said, look, when I explained this to my parents this way, they got it. I told my parents, remember how you wanted to diversify your financial portfolio to minimize risk? And the parents went, sure. He said, good. Well, I need to diversify my portfolio, my skill portfolio. So if one job falls off, I got something else I can do. I got something else I can do. So they don't see anything wrong with getting competent in more than one or two skills, but they want to diversify themselves. So if they lose one asset of a job, they can go to the next one and go do something else. The allegiance and alignment to corporations or entities of this generation doesn't have, because they see what their parents have gone through. Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of what you talked about, which is how do you lead in those situations? The first thing you have to do is you have to understand. Empathy is probably the most critical skill. What are they going through? Because as their leader, the corporation is going to give you the doctrine. Okay, here's what we're doing. We're cutting 3,462 people, and here are the names, and please put this out. HR says please put this out by Thursday at 6 a.m., and here is the way to do it and everything else. My advice is let the HR folks and the lawyers advise you, but you have to be the leader, and you have to let folks know. And when you have to lay folks off, it's hard. It is not easy. What you have to do is explain it to them. Here's the reason it's happening. It's not, and they really, we don't do a good job with this. We tell folks it's not personal. To you it isn't, to them it is. They're trying to figure out, how am I going to make a mortgage payment? How am I going to pay this? So thinking through some empathy and how this is going to affect them really makes a large difference.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. And I imagine just how you present yourself, you still need to come across as confident and, I don't know, positive, hopeful or positive, I guess, too.
I think you have to the word I'd search for is you have to come across as caring. Okay. I know this isn't easy. Can I help you? Do you need a reference? If you know somebody and you can call them up and say, hey, I've got a great guy, gal, needs a job. I just had a friend this summer, lost one job, great in her skill, was able to help her find another job. Now she's thriving and doing well on that. People understand that downsizing occurs, but when it's one thing to be downsized, it's another thing to be cut adrift and get told, okay, you used to be part of this entity, you're on your own now, sucks to be you, get out of here. That's really when people start feeling the resentment. I'm
sure when you have to stand over and watch them pack their stuff up, escort them out the building, I mean, nobody wants to deal with that. Yeah. What about, what makes members of the military capable, or maybe even more capable, of leading during challenging times?
Well, a couple of reasons. First off, we're trained to respond. In the Army, you're doing one of two things. You're defending, you're attacking, or you're getting ready to do one of those two. So we are trained to respond when something occurs. We also have a bias at the tactical level toward action. So we have a bias toward tactical action when something occurs. And finally, we also have a habit of being on a team and being about teammates and being synergy. And more than not, kids don't want to let their teammates down. They really want to be viewed as a positive member of the team, that you can count on me. I know when I would be on high performing organizations, you'd walk in, you'd look around and go, no weak swimmers in this group. I better be bringing my A game every day. And you just see that and you realize that and have to step up and do that. So I find that's what makes us better, more capable to respond to crisis, because we're used to doing things as a team and have a bias toward response and tactical action.
What about management versus leadership? And you have specifically said this, that management does not equal leadership.
It does not.
Will you elaborate on that?
Well, first off, it's not an either-or equation, because some people like to make it that. You're either a manager or... No, you have to be both and. You can't be either a manager or a leader. The way I describe it is this. Management is directive. I call management the clipboard and the task list. I got to get these 10 things done. A, B, C. Here's what I got to get done. And you judge success by, lining things off your list. I say it, management is directive. Leadership is connective. How do you connect with folks to get that done? Management is your task list. Leadership is it's 4:35 in the afternoon and one of your subordinates is leaving and they hear you on the phone and hear you say something about something they're involved in. They stop what they're doing, execute an about face, go back to their desk, pick up their file folder, and they're standing outside your door when you hang up the phone and they look at you and go, what do you need? Versus they keep walking to the parking lot and say, well, let me get out of here before the boss asks me any questions. Leadership is when you ask folks 2 questions, they come back with 5 answers. And you go, what's that? Well, here's the 3 other things you're going to need to know if you're going to go into a room and talk about that. So that's the real difference between leadership and management. Management is directive, leadership is connective. Do you take the time to form those connections with folks? Do you take the time to understand how come they're working for you and what their expectations are out of you? I really believe that's the big key and the big difference.
What about, let's see what we can learn from Stevie Wonder. So I liked, you talked about this before, about Superstition. Is that the song, I think?
It is. It was years ago. It was during the financial crisis. And there was a guy on NPR on Fresh Air with Terry Gross, the radio show. And Terry said to him, can you explain how the financial crisis occurred? And I was waiting for a long economic-based, facets and nuances answer. And the guy said, the reason the financial crisis occurred is like Stevie Wonder said. When you believe in things you don't understand, you suffer. And I found in leadership, I tell leaders that one of the things I try to leave them with is, as you become a more senior leader, the issues get harder, the questions become more difficult. And I found as a senior leader, I spent more time understanding, trying to understand. I spent more time asking questions than I did worrying about answers. When I would sit in a meeting and I would get a briefing, I would always wonder, is there a question I'm missing? Is there something I'm forgetting to ask? So when you believe in things you don't understand, you're going to suffer. And if you're a leader and you send your folks off on something you don't completely understand, they're going to suffer. They're going to remember who sent them off on it. They're going to remember who sent them and left them adrift and sucking at this thing. So it's your job as a leader to put them in a position to be successful and making sure you understand what you're asking them to undertake.
What is most effective as a leader? Let's say you bring your team together and you talk about, well, is it more effective to say, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it? Any questions? Or, I know this is kind of an obvious answer, but I want your thoughts on this. Or is it present a topic or an idea and you sit back and listen and then you basically speak last after you've heard everyone speak?
I have never gone wrong speaking last. Now, always a caveat to everything. It depends on the situation. If the enemy's coming over the wall, we're not going to have a big consensus meeting right about now. It's going to be grab your weapon, grab your ammo, get to the barricades and take them out. The reserve falls in on me and I'll put the reserve where I have to as I see the enemy starting to breach certain areas. We're not going to have a lot of time for consensus, and they understand that. But when you do have time to have explanations and to understand and discuss things, I find, and Simon Sinek, the leadership theorist, has talked about this, it's never wrong for the leader to speak last. They know you're the boss. If you speak first, you restrict the conversation. You put the conversation in certain directions that maybe it should or shouldn't go. And when you speak first, you're trying to show everybody you're the smartest guy in the room. When you speak last, you show folks you want to be as smart as everybody in the room. And it's interesting. It's how you take that feedback, how you take that attitude, bring to it. The attitude you bring to it has to be, really, I didn't know that, versus that's pretty stupid, I wouldn't say that again. You start with, that's pretty stupid, I didn't want to say that again. Nobody's going to say anything after that. Yeah. So I find speaking last when the situation allows, but sometimes it doesn't. And at times like that, they will turn to you as a leader and say, boss, what do you need us to do? When I was in Berlin, Germany, and the wall was up, we had a mantra that every single soldier in Berlin knew. And the mantra was very simple. Be at the wall at N+2. N be a notification hour. From N+2 was hours. 2 hours after notification, you better be in a uniform, be with your gear, whatever time you got called. 4 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, it didn't kind of matter. You better be at the wall, meaning be at your battle position. Whether it was on the staff or someplace else, you better be at your battle position at N+2, ready to do what it is you have to do. Boy, that'll clear your head faster than about anything else.
Yeah, I'm sure. What relationship is there between being a follower and being a leader?
Well, leaders can judge how well they're doing by how well they're being followed. There's an old joke about, if you think you're leading and nobody's following you, you're really just taking a walk. You're really not leading anybody. So when you're leading folks, watch and see how they respond. Do they willingly respond? Are their heads up, their eyes bright, and they're saying, yep, I got it, boss, I'm on the team, what do you need me to do? Or are they just kind of sitting there with their hands in their pockets, leaning back, saying, well, I'm listening, but I'm not really buying. I'm not really into this yet. So that really is the indicator, the followership. And they watch to see also how well you follow your leaders. If you expect everybody to be great to you and loyal to you and follow you, and then they hear out of the other side of your mouth that your boss is an idiot and your boss can't do his job and your boss can't do this very well and that very well, and they see that you denigrate leadership and everything else above you, they kind of have a little difficulty giving you the same deference and the same leadership that you desire but aren't demonstrating.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about Nick Saban for a second. We're in Alabama. That's my alma mater. Mm-hmm. And what would you say to someone like him or his team if you were to speak to them, or a company the same way that has kind of been at the top, been very successful for quite a while now, and known to be that way? What do you say to kind of keep that going?
First off, you tell them it's not about doing your best. I talk to them about how is your best getting better, because somebody's always coming behind you. So, when people think, well, I'm doing my best, well, that's okay. But, what I want to know is, are you better now than you were 6 months ago? What are you doing today to make yourself better 6 months from now? I remember 20 years ago, Tiger Woods was going to be the greatest golfer who ever walked the face of the earth, and no one would ever be his equal, and he would be phenomenal. Now, Tiger seems stalled at 14 major championships. Jack Nicklaus still is the king at 18. But there are a bunch of young guns coming up behind Tiger who are not deferring to Tiger and bowing down to Tiger and everything else. His best stopped getting better because of a combination of physical and some other ailments and things he had. Well, it's the same thing. With Nick Saban, the situation is he is constantly rotating his team every year. I mean, he's gone through, in the national championships, he went through how many different offensive coordinators, how many different quarterbacks, has gone through that. What he does is he builds a process that people have to work within, and they have to maintain excellence. And he wants the best to keep getting better. And he doesn't focus on, it's interesting when you read and watch what he doesn't focus on records. He focuses on, are you doing the right thing when you're supposed to do it? And if you do that, the right things are going to happen. So I'm not focusing on records, and I'm not focusing on what else. Sometimes they will find, really great people will find out they played better in a loss than they did in some of their victories. And when they do that, you got to say, every once in a while the ball bounces the other way. But he really focuses on doing the right thing. You can see some of the rages he goes into on the sidelines when he's up by 37 points, and you're going, you're up by 37 points, dude. Chill out. Well, he's not going to chill out because he's driven that way. And he wants folks to get better because he understands as soon as you rest on your laurels, somebody's coming up to take those laurels from you. So it's really about your best getting better. And if you're a high-performing organization, the one advantage of that is if things are going okay today, you can focus on your best getting better, but it's time to focus on the future and how do you get better? What did you not get around to? Well, you're doing pretty good now. You got time to focus on some of those things. The biggest thing is you cannot get complacent when you're doing well. Otherwise, you're going to lose your place.
Yeah, hopefully we didn't lose all the Alabama haters in that topic just then.
Well, the Auburn folks will let you know. Don't
Yeah,
worry. It's interesting you mentioned that. When I moved to Alabama, the first thing folks would ask me is they'd lean in real close, and especially the first year I was here, they'd say, because you can tell from my accent, I don't sound like I'm from here. And people would say, have you found a church yet? And you had to answer that question in about 5 seconds. Their car was going to be parked in your driveway Sunday. They were going to be taking you to their church. And being an Irish Catholic from New York, I thought it was a bounty system. Hey, I brought a new one in. Where's my chicken? Where's my pie? I brought another one. But the other thing they'll do is they'll lean in real close and look at you and say, you new here? I say, yes, I am, sir. And I'd say, well, okay, boy, where you at? Roll Tide, War Eagle, where you at? And so far I've told them, well, I'm still a Go Army fan. And they pat me on the head very nicely and say, we don't play them yet. Hope you boys beat Navy this year and leave me alone. So we've been pretty good so far.
Yeah, my wife's family lives out west, and her mother-in-law is here visiting, or her mom is visiting right now. And she just told me again recently, she said, everybody hates Alabama. So yes, I know. I know that. That's all right. In closing, I want to talk about your book, Leadership 4321. Will you just talk about it and maybe how it got the title?
It was when I came back from Iraq in 2004. I thought I would have. I brought my unit back. We had been assigned to Germany. We got deployed to Kuwait and Iraq, and I thought we would redeploy home. And normally Germany is a 2-year tour. And I wasn't back 90 days, and I got a phone call that said, I hadn't been in command a year yet, and they said, you're leaving and you're going to go take command of the Ordnance Center and schools at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. And Ordnance is the largest branch in the Army. It was at the time headquartered at Aberdeen Proving Ground, 120,000 soldiers in the Ordnance Corps. And they do all ammunition, surveillance and maintenance. They do all bomb disposal, EOD, the IED threat that we have now in the fight, and then all the maintenance that goes on in the Army, all the maintenance MOSs, military occupational specialties. So I had about 35 different military occupational specialties. We were training anywhere about 20,000 soldiers a year, and the whole Corps was 120,000, so they would rotate through the training. So I thought I had to concentrate on technical aspects of the job. Are we doing things right? I found technical aspects was the last thing I needed. When I would talk to classes, as the commanding general, as the commandant, I would talk to classes, I would talk to sergeants, I would talk to warrant officers, I'd talk to young officers. They didn't ask me technical questions. They wanted leadership questions. So I came up with this 4-3-2-1 presentation. I built it and thought about it. And it was the 4 expectations folks have of leaders. The 3 critical questions leaders should ask and answer before they launch their folks off on something. 2 reasons for stress in organizations, and I found only 2 reasons for stress. And then the 1 critical factor of the equation, which is how do you master the trust equation and maintain and instill and keep the trust equation going in the organization between the leader and the led. And I find those are the critical things to do. I was out on the speaking circuit for about 2.5 years, and a guy came up to me after a presentation I did in Orlando, and he said, sir, I was in the back of the room and there's no book for sale. I said, well, no, sir, I didn't think there was enough about a book. He said, General, you need to write this book. You need to do that. So I started working on it. I didn't put that book together at first. I put a book called Leadership A to Z together. And each letter of the alphabet, 3 or 4 leadership lessons, each letter of the alphabet. A, don't mistake activity for achievement. B, behavior is believable. C, don't mistake competence for confidence, et cetera, et cetera. So go through it like that. And X, Y, and Z were a little challenging, but I got through those as well. And then I hit a stalling point. I found a publisher. I finally self-published. We're in our 5th printing now. Just amazing. And most of the sales are, you can get on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, but most of the sales are what I call back-of-the-room sales or pre-sales. An organization, for example, just had me, and they wanted to have me speak, so they hired me to come speak, and they also said, we want 150 copies of the book, and would you please sign them, and would you please stay afterwards and personalize them for our audience, right, to give them, put it in the audience's goodie bag, and like as a takeaway for them that they can have with them. So I've been very blessed, and it's been an amazing experience. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, and people get surprised when I say that, but the reason is in the Army I got paid and was required and responsible for getting other people to do things. When I was writing the book, if I didn't like the way it was going, I got up from my desk, went in the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and yelled at the guy who wasn't doing what he was supposed to do because there wasn't anybody else to do it but me. So I was very, very fortunate. It was an interesting journey. I learned a lot about aspects of a business I knew nothing about. But it's been very fulfilling. I've been very, very blessed.
Great. So where do you recommend people get your book, man?
Well, you can get it at, you can go on Amazon. You can also go on Barnes & Noble's site. You can also go on my website, vinnyboles.com. That's VINNYBOLES, vinnyboles.com. And you can just send me an email and tell me you'd like one. And if you'd like one, I'll send you a personalized copy signed, and you can send me a check, and we can do it from there.
Great. What in closing, Mr. Boles?
I would say that leadership's not complicated. It does require time to connect with the folks that work for you. And it does require patience. And I find more importantly, it requires persistency and consistency. It's the most important thing we do. But sometimes we get so many urgent things pulling us away from leadership that we don't get the chance to do the important things that we have to do. There's nothing you can do that's more important than connecting with your folks. And one of the challenges is folks change so often, move around so often, that I still remember when I was in battalion command as a lieutenant colonel. I'd been in command for about a year, and I said, okay, now I've been in, it's a 2-year job. Okay, I've been here a year. Now I'm really going to kick it into gear the second year because, I got my stride, know what I want to do, and I started talking, and people started looking at me strange, and I started realizing, how many of these folks were in the job they were in a year ago? And the answer was not many. So folks will churn. So you can never, ever, ever, ever over-communicate with your folks. About the time you get tired of talking about it, you're about halfway done. There's still more to say. So never miss the opportunity to connect with and talk to your folks. Don't hesitate to ask your folks what they're thinking. They'll usually tell you. And I would say the most critical skill, I get asked a lot, what's the most critical leadership skill someone should have? I have found over time the most critical leadership skill is how you take bad news. If you take bad news as you're going to pull a flamethrower out from underneath your desk and start taking people out, and you're going to start throwing people under the bus because things went wrong, things go wrong to good organizations. Bad things happen to good teams. Alabama, God love us, Alabama throws interceptions. Alabama has fumbles. That's not the problem. The issue is how do you respond to bad things when they happen? Great organizations respond as a team, and bad things bring a team together, and they say, we got this, we'll fix it. In substandard organizations, when something bad happens, they go, that's not fair, it sucks to be us, it's somebody else's fault. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things I look for. How do you take bad news? Do you use it as a building block to build on and get better? Or do you use it as a blame scapegoating mechanism? And if you use it as blame scapegoating, it's not going to work very well. Longer answer than you probably wanted, but that's kind of my thought on that.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you, and thanks so much for what you're doing for all our forces and all our folks out there, keeping the torch held high for us.
You're welcome. I love it. It's my side hustle. It's just I can't live off of it right now.
I understand. Thanks so much.